The rain was coming down hard that Friday evening, turning the parking lot of Miller's Diner into a sea of puddles and reflections from the neon signs. Inside the warm, brightly lit restaurant, the smell of fresh coffee and grilled burgers filled the air. It was the kind of place where truckers stopped for a hot meal, families came for weekend breakfast, and locals gathered to catch up on town gossip. Behind the counter, wiping down tables with practiced efficiency, was a young woman who had become as much a part of the diner as the red vinyl booths and checkered floor tiles. At 24, she moved with quiet confidence, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing the standard uniform of black pants and a white shirt with the diner's logo. To anyone watching, she looked like any other waitress working the evening shift, focused on getting orders right and keeping customers happy. What nobody knew was the story behind those calm, observant eyes. 3 months ago, her world had turned upside down when her mother collapsed at work. The doctors said it was serious, the kind of serious that required immediate surgery and months of expensive treatment afterward. Without hesitation, she had made the hardest decision of her life. She packed up her textbooks, said goodbye to her professors, and walked away from her master's degree program just 6 months before graduation. The degree was in criminal justice, something she had been passionate about since childhood. Growing up, she had always been fascinated by stories of people who stood up for others, who fought against injustice and made the world a little bit safer. Her father, who had served in the military for 20 years, had encouraged her dreams and taught her that sometimes the most important battles are fought by ordinary people in extraordinary moments, but dreams don't pay medical bills, and her mother's insurance only covered a fraction of the costs. So she found herself here at Miller's Diner, working double shifts and picking up every extra hour she could get. The pay wasn't much, but tips from regular customers helped, and the manager let her take home leftover food at the end of the night, which meant more money could go toward the growing stack of medical bills on her kitchen table. She had always been athletic, something that came naturally from years of following her father around military bases. When other kids were playing video games, she was learning self-defense techniques and physical fitness routines that most adults would find challenging. Her father believed that everyone should know how to protect themselves, regardless of their size or gender. What started as basic lessons in their backyard had evolved into something much more serious over the years. During college, she had continued training at a local gym that specialized in practical self-defense. The instructor, a former military contractor, had been impressed by her natural ability and dedication. While her classmates were studying for exams, she was learning pressure points, escape techniques, and how to read body language to identify potential threats before they became dangerous. She had even worked as a bouncer at a college bar during her undergraduate years, something that surprised everyone who knew her quiet, studious personality. But the job paid well, and she discovered she had a talent for de-escalating tense situations before they turned violent. Her calm demeanor and confident presence could often diffuse a confrontation with just a few words and the right body language. Now, folding napkins during a brief lull in the dinner rush, she thought about how different her life might have been if circumstances hadn't forced this change. Her professors had been disappointed when she withdrew, telling her she had real potential in law enforcement or security consulting. But family came first, and she had learned long ago that sometimes doing the right thing meant giving up what you wanted for yourself. The diner's regular customers had no idea about any of this history. To them, she was simply the friendly waitress who remembered their usual orders, asked about their families, and never seemed rattled no matter how busy things got. Old Mr. Peterson, who came in every Tuesday for coffee and pie, often told her she was too smart to be working in a place like this. Mrs. Chun, who brought her grandchildren for pancakes on Sundays, would slip her an extra tip and whisper that she reminded her of her own daughter. What they saw was someone who handled difficult customers with grace, who could balance multiple plates while navigating a crowded dining room, and who somehow managed to smile even during the most stressful shifts. They didn't see her studying medical terminology online during her breaks, researching treatment options for her mother's condition, or carefully counting every dollar at the end of each day. The other employees at the diner were mostly good people, working hard to make ends meet. There was Tom, the cook, who had been there for 15 years and knew every customer's preferences by heart. Linda, the morning shift manager, treated everyone fairly and always had encouraging words when tips were slow. And Jake, the dishwasher, who was saving money for trade school and always volunteered to help with the heavy lifting, but working in a restaurant meant dealing with all kinds of people, and not all of them were pleasant. There were the impatient businessmen who snapped their fingers for attention, the teenagers who left messes and tiny tips, and the occasional drunk who thought a few beers gave them permission to be rude. She had learned to handle all of these situations professionally, using the same calm presence she had developed during her bouncer days. Her training had taught her to observe everything around her, to notice details that others might miss. She could tell when a customer was having a bad day just by watching how they sat down. She knew which tables were likely to be difficult based on the way people spoke to each other. And she had developed an almost sixth sense for recognizing when a situation might turn problematic. This particular Friday evening felt different somehow. The weather had kept some of the regular customers home, and the dining room had an unusual mix of travelers and locals. She had served truckers passing through town, a family celebrating a birthday, and a group of construction workers grabbing a quick dinner after their shift. Everyone seemed tired, perhaps from the long week or the gloomy weather outside. As she refilled coffee cups and cleared plates, she found herself thinking about her mother's upcoming appointment with the specialist. The treatments were working, but slowly, and the costs kept climbing. She had calculated that if she could keep working these hours for another 6 months, they might finally get ahead of the bills. It meant putting her own dreams on hold indefinitely, but seeing her mother's health improve made every sacrifice worthwhile. The sound of motorcycles rumbling into the parking lot cut through the usual dinner conversation. Through the rain-streaked windows, she could see headlights cutting through the darkness as several bikes pulled up near the entrance. It wasn't unusual for bikers to stop at the diner, especially on weekend evenings. Most were just regular people who happened to ride motorcycles, polite customers who ordered hearty meals and left reasonable tips, but something about this group felt different as they dismounted their bikes and headed toward the door. Maybe it was the way they moved or the loud conversations she could hear even through the glass. Her training kicked in automatically, and she found herself mentally noting exit routes and potential issues, the same way she had learned to assess any new environment. The front door opened with its familiar chime, letting in a gust of cold air and the sound of rain hitting the pavement. What happened next would test everything she had learned about staying calm under pressure, about protecting herself and others, and about the difference between appearing weak and choosing to be patient. Sometimes the most dangerous situations begin with what seems like just another ordinary evening at work. The group that walked through the door commanded immediate attention. 5 men in black leather jackets, their boots heavy on the checkered floor, bringing with them the smell of rain and motor oil. The leader was impossible to miss, a mountain of a man who stood at least 6'4", with arms that looked like tree trunks covered in elaborate tattoos. His beard was thick and unkempt, and there was something in his eyes that suggested he was used to getting his way through. Intimidation rather than politeness. The other customers in the diner instinctively looked down at their plates, the cheerful dinner conversation dropping to nervous whispers. Even Tom in the kitchen peeked through the service window before quickly ducking back out of sight. The family celebrating their daughter's birthday suddenly seemed very interested in finishing their meal quickly. She watched them settle into the large corner booth, noting how they spread out to take up as much space as possible. Their leader sat with his back to the wall, a position that gave him a clear view of the entire restaurant. It was the kind of strategic seating that someone chooses when they want to control a room, and she recognized it immediately from her training. Taking a deep breath, she approached their table with the same professional smile she gave every customer. Her father had always taught her that respect was earned through actions, not demanded through fear, and she believed in treating everyone with basic courtesy until they proved they didn't deserve it. "Good evening, gentlemen," Welcome to Miller's Diner. Can I start you off with some coffee or something to drink? The leader looked up at her with a slow, predatory smile that made her skin crawl. His eyes moved over her in a way that was deliberately uncomfortable, lingering longer than was appropriate. When he finally spoke, his voice was loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. Well, what do we have here? Aren't you just a pretty little thing? He leaned back in the booth, making himself even more imposing. I think I'll have whatever you're serving, sweetheart. The comment drew snickers from his companions, but she maintained her composure. She had dealt with inappropriate customers before, and the key was to stay professional while making it clear that certain behavior wouldn't be tolerated. We have fresh coffee, iced tea, sodas, and milkshakes, she replied evenly. I can also tell you about tonight's specials if you'd like. Oh, I bet you could tell me about a lot of special things, he said with a laugh that was meant to embarrass her. But let's start with coffee. Make it strong, just like I like my women. More laughter from the table, and she could feel the eyes of other customers watching to see how she would handle the situation. Part of her wanted to walk away and ask Tom to take their order, but she had learned long ago that backing down from bullies only encouraged them to push harder. I'll get that coffee right out for you, she said, turning to walk away. Hey, where are you going, beautiful? I wasn't done talking to you. She turned back, keeping her expression neutral. Is there something else I can help you with? Yeah. You can help me understand why a girl like you is working in a dump like this. You should be somewhere more exciting. His voice carried implications that made her uncomfortable, but she had dealt with worse during her bouncer days. I'll be right back with your coffee, she repeated, walking toward the counter with measured steps. She could feel their eyes following her, and she heard more crude comments and laughter behind her at the coffee station. Tom appeared beside her, his face creased with worry. You okay? Those guys are giving me bad vibes. I'm fine, she assured him, though her hands were steady. As she filled the coffee cups, just keep an eye on things, okay? When she returned to their table, the leader had spread himself out even more. His arm draped across the back of the booth in a way that would force her to lean close to set down the cups. It was a deliberate power play, designed to make her uncomfortable and assert his dominance. Here's your coffee, she said, setting the cups down efficiently without getting closer than necessary. You know what, darling? I don't think this coffee is hot enough. Why don't you take it back and make me a fresh pot? She could tell by touching the pot that the coffee was perfectly hot, probably brewed less than 20 minutes ago. This wasn't about the coffee, it was about making her jump through hoops for his entertainment. The coffee is fresh, sir. Would, you like me to bring you some cream or sugar? His face darkened at her refusal to comply with his unreasonable demand. Are you arguing with me? I said the coffee isn't hot enough. I think I know what I want better than some waitress. The entire restaurant had gone quiet now, everyone pretending not to watch while hanging on every word. She could see the family, with the birthday girl gathering their things to leave early, and Mr. Henderson at the counter was gripping his coffee cup so tightly his knuckles were white. I apologize if the coffee isn't to your liking, she said calmly. I can bring you something else if you prefer. What I prefer, he said, standing up suddenly so that he towered over her, is for little girls to show some respect when they're talking to me? The threat in his voice was unmistakable, as she felt her training kick in automatically. Her weight shifted slightly, her balance centered, ready to move if necessary. But she kept her expression calm and professional. Sir, I'm trying to provide good service. If there's a problem with your order, I'm happy to fix it. But I need you to lower your voice so we don't disturb other customers. This reasonable request seemed to infuriate him further. Don't tell me what to do. You work for tips, which means you work for me right now. He reached out and snapped his fingers inches from her face, a gesture so dismissive and rude that several customers audibly gasped. When I tell you to do something, you do it. Now go get me fresh coffee and make it snappy. She stood her ground, her voice remaining steady, despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her system. I'll be happy to bring you fresh coffee. Please have a seat and I'll take care of that right away. But instead of sitting down, he stepped closer, invading her personal space in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate. You've got some attitude on you, don't you? I think somebody needs to teach you some manners. The situation was escalating quickly beyond a simple difficult customer scenario. She could see his friends watching with interest, none of them showing any intention of calming him down. In fact, they seemed to be enjoying the show, probably accustomed to watching their leader bully service workers who couldn't fight back. "Sir, I need you to step back, please," she said clearly, loud enough for everyone in the restaurant to hear. It was important that any witnesses understood she had tried to de-escalate the situation through proper channels. Or what? He laughed. "What's a little thing like you going to do about it?" That's when he made his first serious mistake. With a deliberate slow motion designed to humiliate her in front of everyone watching, he reached out and flicked his water glass with his finger, sending it tumbling to the floor with a crash that echoed through the silent restaurant. "Oops," he said with mock innocence. "Looks like you've got some cleaning up to do. Better get down there and clean up my mess like a good little girl." The water spread across the floor, and pieces of broken glass scattered under the table. He stood there with his arms crossed, clearly expecting her to get down on her hands and knees to clean it up while he watched. It was a power play designed to completely humiliate her and establish his dominance over not just her, but everyone watching. But what he didn't know was that the young woman standing in front of him had faced down drunk college football players. Twice his size, had been trained by military professionals, and had never backed down from a bully in her life. And his next move was about to be the biggest mistake he had ever made. As she looked down at the broken glass and spilled water, something shifted inside her mind. It wasn't anger exactly, but rather a cold, calculating awareness that came from years of training. Her father's voice echoed in her memory from countless lessons in their backyard. The most dangerous person in any room is the one who stays calm while everyone else loses control. She had spent 4 years learning from instructors who had served in some of the most dangerous places on earth. Men and women who had faced real threats, real violence, and had survived by being smarter, faster, and more prepared than their opponents. They had taught her that size and intimidation meant nothing if you understood leverage, timing, and human anatomy. During her college years, she had continued training at a specialized gym downtown. The instructor there was a former military contractor who had worked in places most people only saw in movies. He had been impressed by her natural ability to read people, to spot weaknesses and advantages that others missed. While her classmates were studying textbooks, she was learning how the human body worked, where the pressure points were, and how a person's balance could be used against them. The bouncer job at O'Malley's bar had been where theory met reality. College bars were notorious for trouble, especially on weekend nights when alcohol and testosterone mixed in dangerous combinations. She had learned to spot potential problems before they started, to read body language and voice patterns that indicated when someone was about to cross the line from loud to violent. She remembered the first time she had to physically handle a situation. A drunk football player, probably 250 pounds of muscle, had been harassing female customers and refused to leave when asked. When he grabbed her arm and tried to push her aside, she had used a simple wrist control technique that put him on the ground in seconds. The shock on his face was something she would never forget. He had expected easy resistance from someone half his size, but this situation was different. This wasn't a drunk college kid acting stupid. This was a grown man who seemed to enjoy causing fear and humiliation. She could see it in his eyes, the way he was feeding off the discomfort of everyone in the restaurant. He wasn't just being rude. He was deliberately creating a scene to demonstrate his power over people he saw as beneath him. As she knelt down to start picking up the glass, she noticed several things that the average person would miss. First, despite his size and tough appearance, he was standing with most of his weight on his left foot, suggesting an old injury or weakness in his right leg. Second, his balance was poor. He was leaning slightly forward, probably from years of trying to use his height to intimidate people. Third, his hands were soft, with no calluses or scars that would indicate real fighting experience. Her training had taught her to assess opponents quickly and accurately. This man was what her instructors called a paper tiger, someone who looked dangerous but relied entirely on intimidation rather than actual skill. He had probably spent his whole life getting his way through size and aggression, never having to back up his threats with real action, but there was something else she noticed that worried her more. His friends weren't just watching passively. They were recording with their phones. This wasn't random harassment. They were filming this humiliation, probably planning to share it online for laughs. The thought of being turned into entertainment for their social media followers made her stomach turn. "That's it," the leader said loudly, clearly performing for his audience and the cameras. "Get down there and clean up like you're supposed to. Maybe this will teach you some respect." The other customers were looking away now, too uncomfortable to watch but too afraid to intervene. She could see Mr. Peterson at the corner table, his hands shaking as he counted out money for his bill. The family with the birthday girl had already left, their celebration ruined by the ugly scene. Even Tom had disappeared into the kitchen, probably calling the police, though she knew they would take at least 15 minutes to arrive. As she continued picking up glass pieces, the leader stepped closer, his boot deliberately coming within inches of her hand. "You know what? I don't think you're being respectful enough. Maybe you should apologize for giving me attitude." This was the moment her father had always warned her about, when a bully mistakes patience for weakness and decides to push further. She had given this man every opportunity to behave like a decent human being. She had remained professional despite his rudeness, tried to de-escalate the situation, and even complied with his unreasonable demands. But instead of recognizing her restraint as strength, he had interpreted it as fear. Her instructors had taught her about the psychology of violence, how predators choose their victims based on perceived vulnerability. They look for people who seem afraid, isolated, or unable to defend themselves. What they don't expect is someone who appears compliant but is actually making careful calculations about distance, angles, and opportunity. She stood up slowly, holding the pieces of broken glass in a napkin. "I think we're done here," she said quietly. "I'm going to have to ask you and your friends to leave." The laughter that erupted from the table was loud and mocking. "You're asking us to leave?" the leader said incredulously. "Little girl, you're not in charge of anything. We're customers and we haven't even ordered food yet." "You're not customers," she replied calmly. "You're causing a disturbance and you're making other people uncomfortable. This is a family restaurant and your behavior isn't appropriate here." His face darkened at being challenged so directly. In his world, service workers weren't supposed to stand up to him. They were supposed to take whatever treatment he dished out and thank him for the privilege. The fact that this young waitress was speaking to him like an equal clearly infuriated him. "Listen here, you little—" he started, but she cut him off. "No. You listen. I've been polite. I've been professional. I've tried to serve you despite your rudeness. But you've crossed a line, and now I'm telling you to leave." The restaurant had gone completely silent. Even the kitchen sounds had stopped. Everyone was watching this confrontation between a massive, intimidating biker and a young woman who should have been terrified but somehow wasn't. There was something in her voice, a quiet confidence that suggested she wasn't as helpless as she appeared. "Do you know who I am?" he demanded, stepping even closer. "Do you have any idea what I could do to you?" "I know exactly what," she replied, her voice steady and clear. "You're someone who thinks size and noise make you powerful. Someone who picks on people you think can't fight back. Someone who needs an audience to feel important." The accuracy of her assessment hit him like a slap. His face flushed red with anger, and for the first time, his carefully constructed, intimidating persona cracked slightly. Nobody had ever spoken to him like this before, especially not someone he had assumed would be an easy target. "You've got some mouth on you," he snarled. "Maybe somebody needs to teach you to keep it shut?" That's when he made the mistake that would change everything. Instead of just threatening her with words, he reached out and grabbed her wrist, his large hand wrapping around it like a vice. It was meant to be a display of physical dominance, a way to show everyone watching that he could control her whenever he wanted. But what he didn't realize was that he had. just given her legal justification for everything she was about to do. To him, and more importantly, he had just discovered why her father had always said that the most dangerous opponents are the ones who let you make the first move. The moment his hand closed around her wrist, everything changed. The chatter in the restaurant stopped completely, as if someone had pressed a mute button on the entire world. Every customer, every employee, everyone in that room knew they had just witnessed a line being crossed. This was no longer verbal harassment or intimidation. This was assault. But while everyone else sat frozen in shock, her mind switched into a mode that her father had drilled into her since childhood. Time seemed to slow down, and every detail became crystal clear. She could feel the exact pressure of his grip, the position of his thumb, the angle of his arm. She could see the smug satisfaction on his face as he squeezed harder, probably expecting her to cry out or beg him to let go. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to let go of me," she said, her voice carrying a tone that made several people look up with sudden interest. There was something different about the way she spoke now, not scared, not pleading, but with the calm authority of someone who knew exactly what they were capable of. The leader laughed, a sound that was meant to be intimidating but came across as nervous to anyone really listening. "Or what, little girl? What are you going to do about it?" He tightened his grip, probably expecting her to wince or try to pull away. Instead, she shifted her weight slightly, a movement so subtle that nobody in the restaurant would have noticed unless they knew what to look for. But to someone trained in combat, it was as clear as a warning shot. Her father had always taught her that the best self-defense was avoiding trouble altogether. Walk away from confrontations when possible. De-escalate with words before using physical force. Give people every opportunity to make better choices. But he had also taught her that when someone puts their hands on you without permission, all bets are off. "You made a choice when you grabbed me," she said quietly. "I tried to handle this professionally. I gave you multiple chances to behave like a decent human being. But you decided to put your hands on me, and that changes everything." Something in her tone made his friend stop laughing. The one holding the phone to record started to lower it slightly, as if sensing that this situation was about to go in a direction they hadn't expected. The leader himself seemed to realize that her reaction wasn't what he had anticipated, but his pride wouldn't let him back down in front of his audience. "You think you can threaten me?" he snarled, pulling her closer. "Do you have any idea how? Many little girls like you I've dealt with." That was his second mistake and his last warning. By pulling her toward him, he had brought her well within the range where her training became most effective. Her instructors had always emphasized that real self-defense wasn't about fancy moves or dramatic techniques. It was about understanding leverage, pressure points, and human anatomy well enough to end a confrontation quickly and decisively. "I'm not threatening you," she replied, her voice now carrying an edge that made the hair on the back of people's necks stand up. "I'm explaining what's about to happen if you don't let go of me right now." But pride and stupidity are a dangerous combination. Instead of releasing her wrist, he decided to escalate further. With his free hand, he reached for her shoulder, probably intending to shake her or push her around to really demonstrate his dominance. It was the kind of move that had probably worked for him countless times before with people who were too afraid or too untrained to fight back. This time was different. The moment his second hand started moving toward her, she acted. Years of training condensed into a single, fluid motion that was so quick most people in the restaurant missed exactly what happened. She twisted her captured wrist in a specific way that her father had shown her when she was 15, using his own grip against him to create leverage. At the same time, she stepped slightly to her left and applied pressure to a specific point just below his thumb. The effect was immediate and dramatic. A sharp cry of pain escaped his lips as he found himself unable to maintain his grip. But she wasn't done. In the same motion, she continued the technique, using his momentum and surprise to guide him downward. Within seconds, this man who had seemed so imposing and threatening was on one knee beside the booth. Gasping in shock and pain, the restaurant erupted in surprised exclamations and the sound of chairs scraping as people either stood up to get a better view, or moved back to give them space. His friends started to rise from their seats, but something about the way she was positioned, calm, balanced, clearly in control, made them hesitate. "Stay where you are," she said to them, her voice carrying an authority that none of them had expected from the quiet waitress they had been tormenting. "This is between me and him." She still had control of the leader's wrist, holding it in a way that kept him immobilized without causing permanent damage. Her father had always emphasized that the goal was to stop the threat, not to cause unnecessary harm. But she also positioned herself so she could see all of his friends, ready to respond if any of them decided to join the fight. "This is what's going to happen," she said, speaking directly to the man who was now looking up at her with a mixture of pain, shock, and something that might have been fear. "I'm going to let go of you. You're going to stand up slowly. And then you and your friends are going to walk out of here and never come back." "You crazy," he started to say, but she applied just a little more pressure to the pressure point, and his words turned into a sharp intake of breath. "I'm not finished talking," she said calmly. "You came into this restaurant thinking you could intimidate people and cause trouble just because you're bigger than everyone else. You thought that grabbing me would be just another way to show off for your friends. But you picked the wrong person on the wrong day." The other customers were now openly staring, some of them taking out their own phones to record. Word was spreading quickly through the restaurant about what had just happened. Tom had emerged from the kitchen with a baseball bat, but seeing the situation under control, he stayed back and watched with amazement. "I work 2 jobs to pay for my mother's medical bills," she continued, her voice steady and clear. "I've been patient with difficult customers, polite to people who didn't deserve it, and professional even when I was exhausted. But I will not be grabbed, threatened, or assaulted by anyone." She could see understanding dawning in his eyes. This wasn't just some waitress who had gotten lucky with a self-defense move. This was someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Someone who had been trained for situations exactly like this. The person he had thought would be an easy target was turning out to be possibly the most dangerous person he had ever encountered. "Do we understand each other?" she asked. He nodded. Quickly, all of his earlier bravado completely gone. The man who had swaggered into the restaurant like he owned the place was now just hoping she would let him leave, with his dignity intact. "Good," she said, releasing his wrist and stepping back to give him room to stand up. "Now you can get up, collect your friends, and leave." But even as he struggled to his feet, she could see that this wasn't over. His friends were whispering urgently among themselves, and there was something in their body language that suggested they weren't ready to just walk away. Pride, embarrassment, and the presence of witnesses were combining to create a volatile situation that could still explode into something much worse. The leader struggled to his feet, his face red with a mixture of pain and humiliation. He rubbed his wrist where she had applied the pressure point technique, probably still feeling the sharp reminder of how quickly the situation had turned against him. For a moment, it looked like he might actually follow through with her instruction to leave quietly, but then he glanced at his friends, saw their phones still recording, and realized that footage of him being taken down by a waitress was probably already being shared online. The thought of his reputation being destroyed by what had just happened seemed to override any common sense he might have had left. "This isn't over," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Nobody puts their hands on me and gets away with it." She maintained her position near the booth, keeping her weight balanced and her eyes on all 5 men. Her training had taught her that the most dangerous moment in any confrontation was often right after you thought it was over. Wounded pride could make people do stupid things, especially when they felt their image was at stake. "Actually, it is over," she replied calmly. "You grabbed me first, and I defended myself. Everyone here saw what happened. You can leave now with whatever dignity you have left, or you can make this worse for yourself." But his friends were already starting to stand up, and she could see them exchanging looks that suggested they weren't planning to just walk away. The one who had been recording put his phone in his pocket and cracked his knuckles. Another reached into his jacket, and for a tense moment, she wondered if he might have a weapon. That's when Tom stepped forward from behind the counter, still holding the baseball bat. "I think the lady made herself pretty clear," he said in his gravelly voice. "Time for you boys to move along." The cook had worked at the diner for 15 years and had seen his share of trouble. He was in his 50s with graying hair and gentle eyes, but there was steel in his voice that hadn't been there before. Behind him, 2 other employees had emerged from the kitchen, and even Jake the dishwasher was standing ready with a rolling pin in his hands. More importantly, she could hear sirens in the distance. Someone had called the police, and they were getting closer. The smart move for the bikers would be to cut their losses and leave before law enforcement arrived. But pride and anger weren't always compatible with smart decisions. "You think a bunch of restaurant workers scare us?" the leader said, but his voice lacked the confidence it had carried earlier. "We'll deal with all of you." That's when the front door chimed again, and 2 men in uniform walked in. They weren't police officers, but rather state troopers who had been grabbing a quick dinner at the end of their shift. They took one look at the tense standoff and immediately assessed the situation with the practiced eye of law enforcement. "Evening, folks," the older trooper said calmly. "Is there a problem here?" The shift in energy was immediate and dramatic. The bikers suddenly looked a lot less confident about escalating the situation. Being loud and aggressive with restaurant staff was one thing, but picking a fight with state troopers was an entirely different level of stupid. "No problem, officer," the leader said quickly, his tone completely changed. "We were just leaving," but the trooper wasn't buying it. He had clearly walked into the middle of something, and his training told him to get the full story before letting anyone walk away. "Actually, why don't you folks stay put for a minute?" "Ma'am," he said, addressing her directly, "can you tell me what happened here?" She took a breath and gave a clear, factual account of the events. She explained how the group had come in, how the harassment had escalated, and how the situation had turned physical when the leader grabbed her wrist. She spoke calmly and professionally, sticking to the facts without editorializing or letting emotion color her description. Several customers nodded in agreement as she spoke, and Tom added his own observations about what he had witnessed from the kitchen. The family atmosphere of the diner had clearly been disrupted, and it was obvious to everyone present who had been causing the trouble. "And then what happened?" the trooper asked. "I defended myself," she said simply. "I used a control technique to make him release my wrist and suggested that he and his friends leave." The trooper looked at the leader, who was still rubbing his wrist and looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Is that accurate?" The biker glanced around the room, seeing nothing but hostile faces and people with phones ready to contradict whatever lie he might tell. Even his own friends seemed to be distancing themselves from him, probably realizing that the situation had gone way beyond what they had signed up for. "Look, we just came in for some food," he said weakly. "Maybe there was a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Tom spoke up from behind the counter. "You knocked over a glass on purpose, grabbed this young lady, and threatened her in front of a room full of witnesses. What's the misunderstanding?" The second trooper had been quietly observing the group of bikers, and now he stepped forward. "Let me see some identification from all of you," he said firmly. It wasn't a request. As the men reluctantly pulled out their wallets, she could see the fight going out of them. Whatever tough guy image they had been trying to project was crumbling. Under the reality of potential criminal charges and the presence of law enforcement, the older trooper turned back to her. "You want to press charges for assault?" She considered the question carefully. Part of her wanted to see these men face consequences for their behavior. They had come into her workplace, disrupted her customers' evening, and turned what should have been a normal Friday night into a tense confrontation. But she also thought about the bigger picture. "I think they've learned their lesson," she said finally. "But I want them banned from this restaurant permanently. And if I ever see them bothering any other service workers anywhere, we're going to have a very different conversation." The leader nodded quickly, clearly eager to accept any resolution that didn't involve handcuffs. "Yes, ma'am, we understand. No problem." "Good," the trooper said. "Then here's what's going to happen. You gentlemen are going to pay for whatever you ordered. Leave a proper tip for the trouble you caused, and then you're going to walk out of here quietly. And if we get any more calls about you causing problems tonight, anywhere in this county, you're going to find yourselves in a cell thinking about better ways to spend your Friday evenings." The bikers fumbled for their wallets, throwing money on the table with shaking hands. The leader pulled out far more cash than their coffee would have cost, probably hoping that a generous tip might somehow repair the damage to his reputation. As they headed toward the door, the younger trooper stopped them one more time. "Gentlemen, let me give you some free advice. The young lady you just met has more class and composure in her little finger than all of you combined. Next time you're tempted to bother someone just trying to do their job, remember how this evening went for you." After they left, the restaurant slowly returned to normal. Customers who had been holding their breath finally relaxed, and conversations gradually resumed. Several people came up to thank her for standing up to the bullies, and one elderly couple insisted on paying for her gas on the way home. The troopers stayed for a few more minutes, making sure there wouldn't be any retaliation, and complimented her on how she had handled the situation. "That was textbook self-defense," the older one said quietly. "Whoever trained you did a good job." Tom insisted she take the rest of the night off, but she chose to stay and finish her shift. Her mother's medical bills weren't going to pay themselves, and she had learned long ago that life goes on after difficult moments. By closing time, the story had already become part of diner legend, and she knew she would probably be hearing about it for months to come. As she counted her tips at the end of the night, she found significantly more money than usual. Word had spread quickly through the small town about what had happened, and several people had stopped by just to leave extra tips and show their support. It wasn't enough to solve all her financial problems, but it was enough to cover her mother's medication for another month. Walking to her car in the empty parking lot, she reflected on how the evening had unfolded. She had never wanted to use her training in a real situation, but she was grateful to have had it when she needed it. More importantly, she had stood up not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been bullied by people who thought size and intimidation gave them the right to mistreat others. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother asking how her shift had gone. She smiled as she typed back, "Just another normal Friday night at the diner." Some stories, she decided, were better told in person.